You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 21 of A Life in Ruins podcast, where we investigate the careers of those living a life in ruins. I'm your host, Carlton Gover, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Unicorn Johnnon and David Inhow. Our guest tonight is Dr. Shane Miller, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology and Middle Eastern Cultures at Mississippi State University. And he knows our favorite fan, Caleb Welch. Thank you for coming on today. Dr. Miller, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing really good.
Good. You surviving quarantine in Mississippi at this point?
Yeah, man. I don't know when the last time I got a shower was. I feel like I could probably do like some archaeology seriation of my clothes at this point because they got some age on them, and like went on a walk this evening and I realized that like I maybe look like a hobo walking around my nice little middle class neighborhood. But other than that, things are going well.
I haven't done laundry since March 15th, I'm pretty sure. Like it's bad.
Hey,
I didn't shower until I smelled.
It makes me feel like I'm in grad school again in some ways, like just basically holing up and working. And so just being like a weird recluse, working on archaeology stuff and playing computer games. I feel like I'm 23 again.
Do you feel like you're getting ahead on stuff, or are you just kind of toiling? Because I feel like I have a bunch of stuff that I should be doing, but I'm just dicking around basically mostly.
It comes in waves. So here's basically from the professor side of it. Here's how I discovered that this whole entire thing has worked out. At first, they were basically like, everybody just hold off. We're going to figure out what's going on. And it's like, sweet, I got a little bit of reprieve. I got an extra week of spring break. And you know, you kind of just tinker away on stuff. Now everything's like, all right, you're going to put all your classes online. And so it's been a week of like trying to figure out how in the world I'm going to explain principal components to a bunch of people who are math phobic online. And
I would die.
Yeah, it's the secret is your professors are fucking dying too. And so once we get over that, it's just like, okay, now I can go back to working on my other stuff. And then the administrators finally figure out what they want to do, and they've decided that they all want their forms still. And so then they barrage you with all the stuff. They're like, I know that this is a time of crisis, but if you can get the cover of your TPS report in, that would be great. And so it comes in waves. It's like literally watching like wave after wave of people try to figure out. Now I'm starting to get hit with the wave of students who are now freaking out about the end of the semester and are sending me emails about things that could be readily found on the syllabus. So, I mean, it's all right. It's all right.
Just some clarification for our listeners. We're recording this on April 15th, and this isn't expected to drop till May 11th. So we'll see where the world is in a month from now, hence all the quarantine references. But just to get us going, so Dr. Miller, David, to me, compared you as his version of Robro, and that's our cute little nickname for Dr. Eric Robinson, and kind of like how he's mentored me and says, you know, he has that same relationship that, that he has with you. Yeah, we named him that at Rock Shelter for Dr. Bob
His
Kelly's.
nickname in my phone is Old Dirty Robinson because he loves Wu-Tang Clan. And he's the most red-haired, palest dude, but he's a Wu-Tang fan to death.
Yeah, and so David... So like the way David explained you to me, because I've never met you, is like, oh, Dr. Miller is... He's my Robro. And I was like, oh, okay, I got you. So this is serious.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I'll take it. You know, I cannot see him the same, but I can totally see it. I can totally see him being like the guy who's like programming like stuff in R with like Old Dirty Bastard bumping in the background, like just feeling like, you know, like this is going to be the hottest code to drop in this year right here.
There's so many collabs going on.
Yeah. Like sneaking little like bits of like Old Dirty Bastard lyrics into his R code to see if he could still get it published. you know, like, file get period dot dash got your money forward slash. I can totally see him doing that. Oh my god! So
just gold.
Oh man, everybody's got a grad school friend like that. So everybody, yeah. So mine was Steve Yurka. Steve Yurka at Tennessee, who works
Old Dirty Yurka.
Yeah, we call it like this dude is just like out of nowhere, just Wu-Tang rhymes. It's like, what is it with archaeologists and the fucking Wu-Tang clan? And like out of nowhere, he would be like, just like say like random lyrics. Like I remember one time at a party, he just looked at me dead in the eyes and he goes, "Oh my God, what was it?" I memorized it because it was so random. It was like, oh my God. I can't remember it off the top of my head now. It's too far into the evening and I've had a couple of drinks. But it was something like, Alabama slay quick that David Banner gamma ray shit. And I was like, what did you just say to me, man? Like, that's not what a grown man says to another grown man after a night of drinking and looking them dead in the eyes. I don't know whether we're going to fight or hug or what. This has gotten weird.
Oh my God. Oh my God. This is going so well. Well, well, do you have any like fun David stories from the time that he was an undergrad?
And could you give us a little context? So like you were someone who like, as a professor, you taught David and kind of inspired him into the field. So could you give us a little context into that?
So this actually predates my professor days. So I was still a grad student at Arizona. And so whenever I was at Arizona, I still work a lot with my master's advisor, who's David Anderson. And we had gotten some money to look for some sites on the Cumberland River in Nashville. And so I was like the field school TA. I was like one of the for Dave. And so Dave had a bunch of his undergrads. I go out there. And for whatever reason, that summer was like the hottest damn summer. It was 2012. It was like I lost like a good 20, 30 pounds that summer. And I just remember that memory that stands out to me, it was probably about the second weekend of the field school. We finally got permission to go out to this place that's right next to a Paleoindian site known as Whittemire in Nashville. It's like the closest like that part of the world had to Blackwater Draw without the mammoths. It's just like this area around a spring where there was a bunch of sites clustered around it. And the majority of the site got blown out to make duck ponds. And there was like a little section of it left. And another little section of it went into the adjacent property, which was this like array of AM radio towers and shortwave radio transmission stuff for some Christian broadcasting stuff, like who were pumping stuff all the way to
Olstein stuff out in the world.
Yeah, like to China. Like China, the literal country of China knows about this place and is blocking their signal. So that's like how much volume. And like I remember driving out to this place and driving in between the AM radio towers, and I had music going in my truck, and I heard something really weird in the background of the music, and I was like, that's really strange. I've never noticed this on this Black Keys album before, because I remember it was like Black Keys Rubber Factory. I was like, listen to that. I was like, man, they got some weird gospel shit in the background of this I never picked up on before. And I like turned it up, turned it down. It didn't stay the same. I finally turned it off, and I realized there was so much ambient whatever there that my speakers were picking it up from it. And it was like some guy talking about Ezekiel or something. I was like, all right, well, this is some weird shit. And so David and a bunch of the other students came out to work on this site. I remember the first time I went to go check on David and his unit, I looked up at it and I was like, I can't remember if I was critiquing or saying something. I can't remember what I said to him. He just looked at me, like straight at me. He goes, did you say that to me because I'm Jewish? And my face just fell. I was like, oh my God. Like, and then I realized this little son of a bitch just totally got me.
I think you said, like, if you find a Clovis point, I'll give you a gold star.
Yeah.
No.
Oh my God.
Oh God.
Oh. So just imagine just trying to keep your shit together. You know, it's hot. It's like 8 a.m. You've already sweated through your clothes. And then you're like trying to like be a responsible TA person. And meanwhile, you're just basically figuring out shit on the fly, because the secret to it all is that we're all high functioning fuck ups, but we're still fundamentally fuck ups. And like this kid comes at you with this, that kind of insinuate. You don't even know if he insinuated if you were an anti-Semite or not, and you're like, I don't even know how to handle that. And so that was my introduction to David Ian Howe. And then about a week later, he got some gnarly poison ivy because of that unit. And I don't know if he still holds a grudge against me for that or not. I don't know. It was awful.
I was all right from that. I do remember though, you remember the pump that we had that we were trying to get pump out from the river so we could water screen, but it got clogged, and you were like, try to unclog it. And I was like, I don't know how the fuck to do that. Like, I'm not a mechanic. I'm an undergrad in anthropology. I'm basically the dumbest kid there is. And then you were like, just suck it out. And then I put my mouth on it and tried to suck out this like grimy, disgusting swamp like they call it the Scumberland River.
The Scumberland.
I just suck it out, and then it just blasts all over, and I like choke on this like disgusting Shrek water. And I was like, ah! And you laughed so hard. You were probably joking, but I listened to you because you were my leader.
You probably have hepatitis.
Oh my God.
You definitely have hepatitis.
Oh my God.
And also, we were supposed to go, me and remember that kid Hunter and was it Rhett, I think, went in, and Fowler, that was his name. And we went
Fowler.
in.
Old dirty Fowler.
And you were like, go chop down, clear a path in this thick bramble to get to the river so we can do some water screening. And we were like, and that's when Rhett got the really bad poison ivy and had to go to the hospital. And then 2 days later, after us like literally chopping through the jungle like it was the Mayan Yucatan, the guy that worked the Christian radio station was like, I can come out there and hit that with the John Deere if you want. And we were like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Cleared the path.
So Joel Osteen came out there and cleared the path.
Yeah, literally. That was our experience. Oh,
just
man.
like Jesus in the Red Sea. And let's see here. So, Jesus, that was fun. But so you were a TA for Dr. Anderson, who's your master's advisor. And this is while you were a PhD student at Arizona, correct?
Correct.
And Arizona, for our listeners, is one of like the top archaeology schools in the country, and people stab each other to get in there. So you graduated from the University of Arizona with your PhD in 2014. Mm-hmm. And then how long did it take for you to get a professorship at Mississippi?
I defended on a Friday, nursed a hangover on a Saturday, got on a plane on Sunday, and interviewed on Monday for the job at Mississippi State. Like, if there was ever an example of thread in the needle, that was it. Like, I do not understand how I got that lucky. So it just all kind of worked out that I ended up here. So it was not like, I swear I owe some serious world karma for that one.
I mean, your dissertation committee is like extremely impressive. You have Vance Holliday, Steve Kuhn, Mary Steiner, and you kept David G. Anderson on your committee as well. Like, that's extremely impressive. And not to confuse David Anderson with who we had on episode like 13. That's David S. Anderson, but David A. Anderson from Tennessee. I mean, yeah, I mean, your educational background is highly impressive.
Again, thread in the needle. I lucked out, and I had good people as professors. I don't know how I got that lucky, but I got really, really lucky.
That's awesome, man. So are you in line? Are you a full professor at this point in time? Or are you?
No, I just this year I turned in my tenure packet, and I got my letter saying that the university president is supporting me for tenure. So it's at the stage where it's going up to the IHL, so like the state level folks to vote on to get me tenure. So I am literally on the cusp of the mythical magical tenure, for whatever that means. So that would make me, yeah, the magical T word. And so that will get me to associate professor starting in the fall. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So it's kind of a surreal kind of feeling, because it's like one of those things where everywhere you go, each step of the game, you always have, you guys are familiar, like the imposter syndrome, the grad student inferiority complex. You guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I bathe in it.
If you don't, I'm about to eject out of this damn podcast, because you guys, that's the only people who don't have that are assholes.
I feel like the only people that don't have it like actually are imposters. Like that's kind of the thing that I've gravitated towards or seen is like everyone who should be there has imposter syndrome, and the people that shouldn't be there don't have it. And it's interesting dichotomy.
Even I feel there are times like talking to Steve Kuhn, I still even think Steve Kuhn has it, and like Steve Kuhn is probably like, he's one of these people that like I tell people all the time, like, there's very few people I consider to be like just geniuses. Like you talk to them and you're like, that person's at a level that I am just not able to get to. Just brilliant, right? And I still think so many times, like talking to Steve, I'm like, oh my God, he's got inferiority complex. This is the smartest dude I think I've ever met in my life. And David Anderson is like, he's the same way. David Anderson always thinks that like he's just on the verge of being fired. And this dude is just like the encyclopedia of Southeastern archaeology. And so anyways, everybody's got an inferiority complex. And the point being is like, it's one of those things where like crossing the threshold of like getting tenure, you're like, oh my God, I've been working towards this since I was 18 years old. Like, is this where I can stop maybe feeling like an imposter? But I know as soon as I get over that threshold, I'll be like, oh my God, what could I be doing with my time? I'm playing computer games. I'm such a fuck up.
You're not a fuck up. And on that beautiful, and also we're trying to figure out what David Anderson we're talking about here, David A, David S, whatever it is. We're going to end this segment and then we're going to go into segment 2. So catch us on the flip side.
G Anderson, straight up G.
Welcome back to episode 21 of a Life in Ruins podcast. We're starting our conversation again with Dr. Shane Miller from Mississippi State.
All right, so I think we kind of skipped over it earlier. We normally do it in the first session, but either way, it was a fun conversation. You are from Tennessee, right? And that's why you went to UT?
That is correct, yep.
Okay, so I assume you hung out like in the woods a lot in East Tennessee, and that's what led you to being into archaeology. Like, do you want to talk about that?
So the reason why I hung around in the woods a lot was my old man was a logger. So that's what I did in high school, was work with my stepdad. Whenever I wasn't playing sports or after school stuff, he had me working with him logging in the woods, which I feel like was his like grand scheme to make sure that I went to college, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do whenever I went to college, but I'm pretty sure that after watching him haul his ass up that mountain every day, and he would basically stop his bulldozer once we got up to the kind of the area where we were working, and he would, and I feel like I can say this, he would literally kind of roll a joint, enjoy the silence for like the 5 minutes before he started raining destruction down into the forest. And it was like those 5 minutes every day I would watch him. It was like, this is the only 5 minutes of his entire day that he enjoys. And I'm like, man, I don't want to work a job like that. Like, so I don't know what I want to do when I go to college, but I know that I don't want to do this shit. And so I got into college and I realized that there's like basically two things that I really, really enjoyed. And that was football and history. And I was like, man, I don't want to be, no offense to high school football coaches teaching history, but I watched my high school football coach teaching history, and I couldn't say that there were a lot of days that I felt like he enjoyed his job. Some days he did, but like it was, I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. And I just so happened to be like an undeclared major. And the lady who was in charge of all the undeclared majors for ETSU, which is where I started out at, she was like, hey, do you want to be my guinea pig for my graduate class? And I was like, sure. So I literally was advised I was at like a college freshman in front of like 30 master's students in education. And she made me take all these tests and everything. And she's like, oh, give me a list of things that you think are interesting. And I laid out the list. And she's like, archaeology. She's like, I'm going to sign you up for an archaeology class. And I'm like, that's cool. Took it. And I was like, this stuff is awesome. Then after that, I transferred to UT because they had an anthropology major, really great anthropology program. And just by dumb luck, by the time I was finishing up my BA is when David Anderson showed up. And so his actual first semester as a professor is when I started grad school at Tennessee. So I was his first master student, which is another like right place at the right time that I got to have that opportunity.
I thought you were one of his undergrads. I didn't know that. Okay.
No, I was one of Jan's undergrads.
Oh, okay. Dope. Wait, Carlton, did you play high school football too?
You're goddamn right I did. And before I became an archaeologist, I was going to be a high school football coach teaching history.
Yeah.
That sounds like a pattern.
It's an entire thing, man. It's an entire thing.
But yeah, so then you did your master's research at Topper, I want to say, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
So spill the beans, spill the dish, how I ended up there. So the very first semester of grad school, I took Peopling of the Americas with Dave Anderson. Awesome class, a lot of fun. And at that point in time, I was still one of Jan's students. I thought I was going to be looking at like rock shelters on the Cumberland Plateau, looking for like early evidence of independent domestication kind of sites on the Cumberland Plateau. And I just so happened to be in Dave's office, and Dave gets a phone call from Al Goodyear. And he's like, hey, I need 2 grad students to help run this part of the site where we got this Clovis assemblage or these buried Clovis stuff. And do you have anybody? And I just happened to be in the office, me and Steve Yurka, because we were taking the Peopling of the Americas class. Steve knew how to do GIS. I knew how to do web pages. This is like back in the day of like having to make pages with HTML code, like before WordPress and all that stuff. So we were helping Dave with getting his PIBA data set back online after he moved from Tallahassee. And so just dumb luck that me and old Dirty Yurka happened to be in the room. And so we got to go down there and work for summer. And then the next summer they're like, hey, you want to come back and just kind of run shit? And I was like, sure. And so I went back, and it was me and Ashley Smallwood were basically, and Doug Sane were the grad students kind of running things at Topper there for a couple of years. And at that point, I had a whole entire excavation block that I ruled with an iron fist for a summer. And Al was like, hey, you just want to write this up for a thesis? And I was like, man, this is right here staring at it. Why not? And went back and switched advisors to Dave, and I became a Paleoindian archaeologist as a result of just sheer dumb luck. I mean, I thought it was interesting, but it was just something that I didn't come out of the womb thinking about fluted points by any means. So kind of just happened to me, I guess.
Topper's been reoccupied through most periods of time. You can read a bunch of stuff about that. But what makes the Clovis period so interesting about Topper?
So the thing that makes the Clovis occupation of Topper really interesting is that there's only a handful of places in the Southeast that actually have a buried Clovis site. They're rare in the South. And an archaeologist named Bob Dunnell a long time ago kind of pointed out that it's just like an older landscape. So you don't really get as many places where you can get stuff buried. And even Al, the reason why Al Goodyear was there in that part of South Carolina is because he was looking for a site like Topper that had buried Paleo-Indian stuff. And so A, you've got the stuff buried. A, it seems to be, or B, it seems to be in really good context. And that was kind of what my thesis was on, was taking that block and making the case that this is stuff that's in good stratigraphic position. Like, this is all the tricks that you can employ in a sandy site to kind of make the case that you're not looking at a mixed up assemblage, that you're looking at one discrete component. And the other thing that's baffling about it is the extent of it. It's big. We don't fully know the extent of the Clovis deposits there. We have an idea, but it's huge. It looks like a whole entire area. It's like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good analog for it, but it's just like a bunch of different localities that are all spread around these chert quarries. And so the question is now is like, is this like one big event where a whole bunch of people all came together all at once? Or is it a bunch of sequential small encampments that are just being overprinted and as a palimpsest in this one space? And so it's one of these places where you get an interesting and still confusing window into the Clovis culture, in a place where you don't get very many windows into the Clovis culture.
So do you think this is like one of the largest spreads of actual Clovis culture you see, at least in the Southeast, where you're actually having these like really consistent layers of Clovis, over a large space, which is super interesting because we barely get that, in archaeology.
Yeah, it's like the other place that it kind of reminds me of is the central part of the Tennessee River and the lower Tennessee River. Those two areas, they've got a bunch of just sites on every little levee of the Tennessee River through there. There's like, it feels like there's Paleo-Indian sites that collectors have siphoned the points off of, and for like 60 years now. And so it's just like one of these areas in the South that for whatever reason, you get these crazy concentrations of points. And honestly, that was like one of the bigger things that I realized going to Arizona, was getting into discussions about what that all meant. And you get the people out west who are like, you guys got more points there because you got more people running around looking for stuff. And then, the counter argument is like, man, in a place like Allendale County, South Carolina, you might have like that county and the county across the river in Georgia, you might have more Clovis points come out of those two counties than entire Western states. And why is that?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. So especially like Benton and Humphreys County in Tennessee, and like Limestone, Colbert County in Alabama, they are thick. So yeah, so that's like the bomb blasts on Dave Anderson's PIBA maps that have like the huge number of points. Those parts of the world I thought were really, really interesting to study. So that kind of what sucked me in and kept me sucked into Paleo-Indian archaeology from my master's.
Did you see the map of the coronavirus hotspots that was like literally looked just like the PIDBA one?
Yeah, I did. And then it was literally going through and reading the comments, and it was just like, and it was the same argument over and over and over again.
Well, yeah, is it like, was it survey bias versus like population centers? Or, yeah, it's funny. It doesn't. It's just over and over again. It's the same argument over and over again. It's like Mary Press Eunice, one of her dissertation articles was about this. I published stuff about this. Briggs Buchanan has published stuff about this, and it goes back to Mike Schott before him published stuff about this. And so it's just like over and over and over again. It's this debate, like how much modern sampling bias goes into something like that. And I think that like when I look at just the Southeast as a unit, like Mary kind of found it overall, like across the country from the Western states to the Eastern states, it seems to be some correlation with population, but then also modern population correlates with precipitation. So like you can literally historically, sustain more people where there's more water because there's more vegetation and there's just, we require water. So there's like a correlation there. But like when you drill down to just the Southeastern United States, like it's not like
modern population and looking at like things like proxies, like where there's more archaeological sites have been recorded as like a proxy for research interests, like those are not very good predicting variables for finding Clovis points. So I don't know, that those types of questions always made me fascinated. It's kind of like, why is that? What's causing this? And so I can blame that on Dave Anderson for getting that bug in my head early and often.
So you alluded to the concentration in the Southeast got you excited, or at least interested in archaeology, to continue on to Arizona to apply for a PhD program. Did you enjoy being at Arizona? And specifically for us, we are both Todd and Bob students. Did you kind of see some of their research overlap, or did you interact with Todd at Arizona?
So Todd actually came and gave a talk at Tennessee. And when he was it was like some visiting lecture series. And the central premise of it was demography. And so Todd came and did a talk on hunter-gatherers and demography and peopling of the Americas and all that stuff. And I was like, man, this dude's cool. He likes the stuff that I like. And I was like, man, what about going and working there? And I went and told that to my significant other at the time. And she was like, where is he? Wyoming. And that was a no-fly zone. And so she's like, no, you're not, and I'm not moving to Wyoming. And so I was like, okay. So I emailed Todd anyways. and he's like, yeah. He goes, I think at the time I couldn't tell whether he had too many students or something like that. But he's like, hey, you should look into going to Arizona and working with Stephen Mary. And at that point, like, I'd been to Arizona before and thought it was an absolutely gorgeous state. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna look into Arizona. And Vance Holliday was there, who does Paleoindians, and you had Stephen Mary, who hunter-gatherer archaeology, and then Mark Aldendorfer was there at the time, so he did all kinds of GIS spatial analysis stuff. And so I applied, and at the time, whenever I applied, and even when I got in, I had no idea like the kind of caliber program that it was. I was totally that clueless. Again, dumb luck. Got in. Then once I got there, I was like, how in the world did I get into this place? Because I am in a room with a bunch of smart people, which means that like I'm probably the dumbass. Like every train needs a caboose, and I'm probably that caboose. Anyway, so I really enjoyed it there. It was a great place. The thing I liked the best about it was that there was people doing stuff all over the world. So we would take classes, and for example, like I remember one day can't remember what the topic was. I think maybe it was like when we took ecological anthropology, and Steve Lansing came in and was talking about power laws and nonlinearity and networks and stuff like that. I just remember, I think like me, Derek, and Randy all went back to our various data sets and were like, do our data sets do this? Do they conform to those distributions if we start putting stuff on graphs? And just totally nerding out in like the most productive and fun, nerdy ways. And so anyway, so I partially went to Arizona because Todd told me to. And when I got there, like Todd was like the rock star who had just left and got a job someplace. And they were like, you got to be like Todd. Whenever I took hunter-gatherer archaeology, Steve was like, you know, this is a tough act to follow because I had a student here that his term paper for this class, he got it published in Current Anthropology, no pressure. And like, man, fucking Todd. So.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up segment 2. Sorry, Todd Sorovel, and we'll be back with part 3 here in a moment. Stand by. Welcome back to segment 3 of a Life in Ruins podcast. We're here with Dr. Shane Miller, continuing our conversation. Dr. Miller, how do you, David let us know a little tidbit about things. How do you feel about the Cerruti Mastodon site in California?
We don't have to do it if you don't want to.
I am of the persuasion that I think that people got into the New World after 15,000, probably after 14. So that's where I'm at. I don't really have a hard time getting there with certainty. Was that a serious question? Or you guys just fucking with me?
I think kind of both at this point.
So like your really intense GeoArc answer as to how the rocks like pelted the mastodon like really intrigued me when I was in grad school. But then like when that company flew me out there to like do that pilot and I like looked at the bones, they're definitely old. But then I like looked at the rocks and I was like, those aren't tools. Like, and the rocks, like they let me see the mastodon bones and I could touch them, but like the rocks were in a display case and I couldn't like, pick them up and look around and see, which I get, but I don't know. They weren't tools.
I can't tell. Seriously, I can't tell if you guys are fucking with me or not. But I can never tell with you guys at all. So the thing about it is like fitting it into like the larger picture. It's like you didn't have people above the Arctic Circle until after 30,000 years. The DNA, it doesn't jive with anything for the DNA. There's so much that doesn't connect with what we know, like the larger picture. It's an outlier. And in grad school, I remember at the University of Tennessee, there was my stats professor. His last name was Schmidhammer. And old Schmitty would always say that if you have an outlier, it's either bad data or it doesn't belong in the population of which you're interested in. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that. It's an outlier. And so whatever that means, it doesn't, I'm leaning towards it's highly likely that it's bad data and not some form of hominid that's kicking around like Encino Man in Southern California, unbeknownst to us in the 100+ years of North American archaeology that somehow this has slipped by us. I can't get there. I just can't. So I don't know where to go after Encino Man.
You're getting towards the professorship and you're teaching these meldable students. How do you teach these kind of like new discoveries that pop up? Like how does that fit into your curriculum and how do you deal with questions about that?
So I go back. So I was lucky. One of the many areas that I was kind of lucky was I got to be at Arizona when Vance Haynes he's still there. There's two people that I've ever witnessed in my life that get up every day and go to work and do exactly what they want. And that's Vance Haynes and Art Jelinek, the two retired OGs at Arizona. And so I go back to, whenever I have to teach this stuff, I go back to the 3 criteria of Vance Haynes that he set out in the 70s that are based off of Herzlichka, that are based off of Cuvier, that you need to have something that's either an artifact or human remains in good context and a way to date it. And so usually whenever I have like some of these like sites that pop up and I have to talk about them in Intro to Archaeology or North American Archaeology, I'm like, all right, let's run it through this filter. Like, where are the critiques? What is the problem? And usually each pre-Clovis site has some issue of one of those 3 criteria that somebody has a problem with. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a fatal flaw or something like that. But usually the critiques come along one of those 3 lines of critiques or one of those 3 lines of inquiry. And so that's kind of how I frame it. It's like, all right, so what's going on here? Like, why did somebody write a critique of this? And it's usually one of those 3 lines. Like going back to like Calico, right? Like the issue is it might be good context, but the question is are they really artifacts? Or the Cerruti is like, are those really artifacts, and is that an anthropogenic site? So it would be like criteria number 1 of Vance Haynes' 3 criteria.
How does Meadowcroft fit into that?
True. Meadowcroft. So that one's, as an Eastern archaeologist, that one's a hard one. And the reason, if I had to explain that to my students and just, try to be like, the guy on a documentary taking the middle ground and trying to do both sides in journalism, I would say it's one of these sites that's in the kind of context that you can control. The people who witnessed the excavation said it was meticulous. The fundamental problem for that one is no one denies that they're artifacts. No one denies that the context is good. The question is the dating. So it's criteria number 3. And so Vance Haynes argued there might be some kind of problem because you're in the middle of coal country with contamination. And so usually that's again, it comes down to criteria number 3.
I've visited Meadowcroft because they have a whole park, I guess, around it. They have like a prehistoric village. No, it's like a woodland style village set up. Mm-hmm. The guy that got me into archaeology, he teaches at Catholic University. I didn't go there. He also taught at the community college I went to. Dr. David Clark, and he was Adavasio's first grad student up at Pitt.
Really?
And so he took us out to Meadowcroft to see it, and like it's a pretty cool site. I wish Adavasio would publish on it. It's been almost 60 years since it's been excavated.
When I took Paleoindians with Vance Holiday, that was my the first term paper that I started kicking around on, was trying to figure out the long chain of publications with Meadowcroft. And it was like, refer back to previous paper, refer back to previous paper, refer back to previous paper, refer back to previous paper. And there was so it's really, really hard to kind of reconstruct a lot of what's going on there because there's no unified report where everything's in there. And I don't want to cast stones in that regard too, because, I've got gobs of stuff in my lab already that I'm like trying to get written up. Like, I don't want to act like I've gotten all my homework done and then casting stones the other way at somebody who is trying to write up an entire site is daunting. And so, I'm not going to cast stones that way, but it's one of those things where when you make big claims, sometimes you gotta cash that check in publications.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you guys are tested as professors these days to be doing all the research and publishing everything. It's it's a crazy hard place to be in at this point in time but those reports are not the important part. You have to publish articles
So one of the things I really liked about the southeastern United States as far as doing research is all these big reservoir projects going back to like the 1930s and then again in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Like, as part of the finished product, there's all these wonderful monographs with all the data. And so you've got those to kind of begin working with. And then it goes all the way back to C.B. Moore, who published reports on all the stuff that he did in the early part of the last century, like with his little riverboat running around, digging up sites right and left. He wrote up reports of everything that he did that you could still buy today. And so like there's at least that foundation you can build from. And so that's one of the reasons why I like working in the region, is you've got that. But the thing about it is, it kind of is frustrating now is that there's a lot of key sites that are coming out and people are forced to go to the most high impact journal that you can like, it's like the currency upon which you get tenure. And basically they don't care about monographs of reports. They don't care about any of that whenever you're going up for tenure. They want to know if you've published in Science or Nature or PNAS or something like that. And those articles are short. How many of you guys have gone through the frustrating experience of seeing this big claim about a particular site, and then you're reading like, well, this is about 3,000 words or something like really, really short. And you're like, okay, well, I got to go find the supplemental material for this. And now I got to try and connect the dots between like the original article and the supplemental material and wrap your head around what was going on in this site. Yeah. It's like you got to try and wrap your head around something 3-dimensional, like an archaeological site, and a couple of disjointed ways. And it's frustrating as all get out. Or maybe I'm just not that damn smart. Maybe other people can do it, but I struggle with it. And luckily enough, here, like an example of this is Paige Latson down in Florida. Again, it was a short. There's a book on like the big excavations that Dunbar and those guys did, but the more recent stuff that got published in Science by Jesse Halligan at Florida State. The thing I like about, at least being a good citizen in archaeology and good citizens is everything that I've been confused about with that site. I've been able to email her and she emails me right back. And she's like, whatever I question, she's got the data somewhere. And so it's one of these things where, I hope somewhere down the line, they give her the time to actually turn that into a book or some kind of like larger monograph where she can pull together all the things that she'd done. And it'd be great if that actually counted as currency towards tenure requirements, things like that. But that's a battle for above my pay grade.
So I guess I normally kind of ask these questions in the later segments, but I guess it's a twofold question because I think I can, not to throw questions at you, but I mean, I guess that's what a podcast is. Never mind. Quarantine has gotten to me. So my first question would be, what is your favorite thing about, or your favorite aspect about like modern anthropology and archaeology? And then 2, what is something that like you'd like to talk about or discuss, or like something you'd like to, put out there?
What is my favorite thing about modern anthropology?
Because you're like super interconnected. All these like the pedigrees of people, like like the inner, like all the Ben-Fordian stuff, and it's super cool to me.
So there's a lot of different. Whenever I teach theory, I'm like, this isn't like you're no longer. I don't think it's no longer the world where you have to pick a camp for your theoretical perspective. It's not like you have to make a decision on whether you're like a modernist or a postmodernist or processual or post-processualist. You don't have to decide that I'm going to do evolutionary archaeology or if I'm going to do something that's much more humanities driven. You don't have to basically wrap yourself in the cloak of human behavioral ecology and then rail against everybody else for the way they're doing. It's much more of an eclectic discipline now. And I think maybe it's because everybody got tired of the theory wars and they're like, whatever, just go answer a good question or ask a good question and go figure out a way to pursue it. And so I really like the eclectic nature of kind of archaeological theory these days. You talk to some folks and they think it's like the most, people are just going out here and doing whatever it is that they're doing. And back in my day, we had hypotheses and, and it's like, okay, cool. But I work in a region where I don't want to say it's a hotbed for theory, but I feel like there's a lot of people taking archaeology in a lot of different ways. And it's much more open to experimentation. And I think maybe it's just a little more the ethos of like the Southeastern Archaeology Conference that allows for that. And so I remember like going and working with Steve and Mary, and they were students of Binford and very processual oriented. And somebody like Ken Sassman came out when I was a grad student, and we all went to dinner and they had great conversations. And if you know Ken Sassman's work, like Ken Sassman is very much a dirt underneath the fingernails archaeologist, but there's also the part of Ken Sassman that gets really, really bored with archaeology as usual and likes to push the envelope. And so I always really liked being in a place that allowed for that kind of experimentation. And so because of that, for me, whenever I look at archaeology, I'll admit that probably, I'm swear to God, I'm not playing to the home team for all you Wyoming boys, but I've always really liked Bob Kelly's stuff, and I really love his new book. I assign it whenever I teach Intro to Anthropology or Intro to Archaeology, just because I feel it's better at reaching out than a regular textbook. It's just a well-written story. Like my wife, who's a real estate agent, read it, and it's like I realized quickly that like I'm her second favorite archaeologist. And after that. And she told, when Bob Kelly came and talked here, she totally fangirled and was up there, got his signature on his 5th beginning book. It was pretty great. the thing I liked about that, it's a really, if you get down to it, it's a really eclectic book, man. He tackles all kinds of stuff. He looks at it in the big picture. And for me, like, at some point, I got all these like working class buddies, right? Like these guys who are doing a little bit of everything in life. From the guys I grew up with, some of them are they work in factories, they work in construction, they do HVAC. Mm-hmm. One of my high school buddies runs a bank. It's like a whole wide swath of life, from like blue collar, white collar, but a lot of blue collar guys. I want to be able to explain to them what it is that I do and why it matters. And honestly, for me, like, that's kind of more of my interest these days, is how do you break through that? And so I don't know, I've been reading a lot more of like economics literature here the past couple of years. And that was honestly one of the things I worked on in my dissertation was like, I realized I know a lot about stone tool economics. I don't really know jack about like economics. And so that's kind of where a lot of my interest has gone these days. I feel like that was really wandering.
No. Yeah. We love that, just because one of the goals of this podcast is that we're trying to communicate with the public in a way that is digestible for all folks. And I think Carlton, David, and I are all inspired by Bob Kelly's distilling down of that into a place that we can all consume it. And I'm going to ask you a question that you should answer honestly. So if given the chance, would you still choose to live a life in ruins in the Southeast studying Paleoindian archaeology?
Absolutely. I'm going to caveat that, though, and by saying that I actually started out at Arizona doing Paleoindian archaeology, and I wrote a dissertation on how people went from hunting mammoths and mastodons, presumably, to planting sunflowers 10,000 years later. And so part of that was a little bit of goading from my advisors and thinking eclectically and whatnot. But the thing about it is, man, is I've got like this crazy tool set now that not a lot of people have. And I always tell people, like, you know, maybe it might be hubris on my end, but like, if you can figure out like how people were living 13,000 years ago from some bits of flakes that are lying around on the ground, and make some inferences about that are on solid ground, you can do a lot with that data set in a whole bunch of different fields. And I've had some really kind of great experiences that not a lot of people can say that they've had. I've got to see some really, really cool stuff. Worked at a lot of really neat places with cool people. So I would totally do it all over again. No questions asked, no regrets.
Dope.
So I would get that tattoo that says no regrets. I totally get it. You guys seen this? The bad tattoo?
Well, on that note, thank you for joining us today, Shane. We really appreciate it. This has been Life in Ruins, episode 21. No regrets. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer. Gentlemen, why did Paleoindians keep coming back to a site along the Savannah River in South Carolina?
Was it to suck muck water out of pumps?
It is not. Just to top her off.
Oh my God. What the fuck?
Oh boy, thank you, Connor. As
oh
always.
My God.
We're out.
This show is produced by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in Reno, Nevada at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.